clear to me modern cars aren't built to last. They're no longer cars, they're just appliances. Throwaway. With all of the tech, turbocharging, repairs are going to be tens of thousands of dollars in some cases. Who wants that? Who needs that? If I was to go to a desert island and I had to take one of my favorite cars with me, your forever cars, practical, they're reliable, you can fix them, and in many cases, they're just outright fun to own. I put together a list that you're going to want to follow. Let's get into it now. So the first forever car for me, not necessarily in this order, is a 2013 to 2015 Lexus RX 350. Yeah, not the newest, not the fastest, not the flashiest, just possibly one of the toughest luxury vehicles ever built. Under the hood sits the legendary 3.5-liter 2GR FE V6. No turbos, no direct injection, no boost pressure, no complicated carbon foul-up concerns, just old-school port fuel injection with a timing chain, 270 horsepower and about 248 pound-feet of torque. The economy isn't revolutionary, it's respectable for a mid-sized luxury SUV. With 18 miles per gallon, 25 on the highway, and a 21 combined, somehow this thing regularly racks up 250 to 300,000 and even 400,000 miles in some cases. That's the kind of durability that turns owners into evangelists. I know because I'm one of them. Many years ago, I worked at a dealer auction that has long since disappeared. The lot guys were not exactly gentle. Every vehicle got treated like it was competing in a durability test. Cars were started cold, moved 10 feet, shut off, started again, repeatedly. Some vehicles hated it. Sometimes things were going on that you wouldn't think, oh, that's not gonna last. I remember watching an RX 350 get bounced around the auction yard all day. It started instantly every single time. No smoke, no drama, no warning lights, just pure indifference. That's when I started to realize and paying attention to the brands. Years later, I bought a Lexus with the same basic family of drivetrain. By the time it reached 380,000 kilometers, I had developed a strange relationship with the car. Every few months, I expected something expensive to happen. The engine apparently disagreed. Every morning, I fired it up immediately. The transmission shifted smoothly. The AC just kind of worked. The power accessories worked and functioned. There was no problems, no weird lights, and no gremlins to speak of when we talk about a lot of the German manufactured cars. At one point, I found myself standing in the driveway saying, "Could you please brake just a little? I want an excuse to buy something newer." And the Lexus responded by doing absolutely nothing wrong. Of course, even legends have weaknesses. The water pump's probably the most common issue, usually somewhere between 100,000, 150,000 miles. Front lower control arm bushings can wear. You'll often find those starting to make noise and clunking and squeaking. 120,000, 180,000 miles in and around that range. And the funny thing is that Lexus owners often discuss these repairs the way other people discuss replacing batteries in a television remote. Did the water pump? How many times? How many miles? About 140,000 miles. Anything else? No. Conversation over. A clean 2013, 2015 RX 350 often still sells for $16,000 to $24,000 in premium shape. 11K to 18K in average condition, and even high mileage examples still bring in $8,000 to $13,000. People know what they're buying. They're not purchasing a luxury SUV. They're purchasing a bit of a peace of mind. They just don't break. The sedan version honestly deserves honorable mention too. The 2013 to 2015 Lexus ES350, which we know is always known as one of the most reliable, uses a closely related version of the same 3.5-liter V6. It also produces 268 horse, 248 pound-feet of torque, while returning an impressive 31 miles per hour on the highway, or 24 mpg combined. But if I had to pick just one, I'd say the RX 350 wins. Every time. Not because it's exciting, not because it turns heads. It wins because somewhere in Japan, an engineer took reliability personally. When I see a well-deserved, well-maintained 2013-2015 RX 350 today, I don't wonder whether it will reach 300,000 miles. I wonder whether the owner will get tired of it before the vehicle gets tired of running. Whenever somebody asks me the longest standing Mercedes-Benz built in roughly the last 15 years might be 2008 to 2011 Mercedes-Benz C300 Sport, the W204 generation equipped with the naturally aspirated M272 3-liter V6. If I could choose any version, I'd hunt this one down with an incredibly rare 6-speed manual gearbox. They weren't common when new, but they're downright unicorns today. On paper, the car hardly seems special. The M272 produces 228 horse, but honestly, hardly thrilling by today's standards. Fuel economy wasn't spectacular either, with 25 miles per gallon on the highway. Automatics were nearly identical as the manuals. The reason I keep coming back to this car is because of what it doesn't have. It doesn't have turbos, It doesn't have direct fuel injection. It doesn't have the high pressure fuel system operating at extreme pressures. It just simply is a naturally aspirated port fuel injection Mercedes V6 attached to a drivetrain engineered before complexity became a selling point. Years ago, I owned an ML500, and looking back, it wasn't perfect. There was a little rust starting to show up in places, and like any other German vehicle, it occasionally reminded me that maintenance wasn't optional. But I genuinely grew fond of the truck. The V8 felt indestructible. The transmission always seemed to know what it was doing. The whole vehicle gave off the impression that the engineers expected it to spend its life towing boats, crossing provinces, and carrying families through terrible weather without complaint. One of my neighbors actually had an old diesel Mercedes that appears to be constantly immune to aging. Every time I assume it's finally going to retire, every year it keeps driving around. The mileage is so high that most modern vehicles would have become appliances, recycling material, or memories years ago. Yet that old Benz just keeps on trucking. Between my old ML500 and that old diesel Mercedes, I've spent enough time around a well-built Benz to know what the company is capable of doing when durability is given a high priority. Which brings me to my 2018 C300. Now, I don't dislike the car. It's comfortable, it's quick, it's refined, but I'm being asked which Mercedes I'd rather own at 300,000 miles. It definitely wouldn't be the modern turbocharged direct injected 4-cylinder. My newer car often feels like a product designed to impress the first owner, while those other, older, naturally aspirated Mercedes-Benz feels like products designed to impress the third owner, fourth owner. That's why the W204 C300 stands out. Owners consistently describe that car the same way. The doors close with a heavy, expensive sound. The chassis feels solid even after a decade or so of use. The steering has an actual feedback. The longevity reputation is also difficult to ignore. Properly maintained examples exceed 250,000 miles, and I've even seen 300,000 miles. Some owners have reported mileage figures approaching well over 350,000 without any major work. That's becoming increasingly rare in the modern luxury segment. Of course, no Mercedes is perfect, and pretending otherwise would be absolutely ridiculous and dishonest. The intake manifold swirl flaps can eventually fail, usually somewhere between 100 and 180,000 miles. When that happens, owners often see a check engine light and may notice reduced performance, especially at the low end. You kind of lose that grunt. The thermostat is another common issue. Eventually, many of them stop regulating temperature, causing the temperature to run cooler than intended or just overheat. The market seems to recognize this as well. In 2026, rough examples are $3,500 to $6,000, with clean examples $6,500 to $10,000, and with really low mileage examples from $15,000 and up. What I find most interesting is the irony of it all. Mercedes has spent billions of dollars developing newer engines that make more power, burn less fuel, produce less emissions, and accelerate faster. Yet whenever enthusiasts gather and start discussing which Mercedes-Benz are most likely to survive another 25 years, conversations honestly just keep drifting back towards the naturally aspirated V6s and naturally aspirated V8s and older diesel engines. That says something. Sometimes technological progress genuinely improves a vehicle. Sometimes it simply adds more things that can fail. And sometimes I wonder whether there's an old W204 C300 sitting quietly in some forgotten corner of the Mercedes engineering facility, reminding everyone that durability isn't always achieved through innovation. Sometimes durability comes from restraint. The W204 C300 was never the fastest Benz. It wasn't the most luxurious. It wasn't the most efficient. It wasn't even particularly exciting when it was new. Yet if somebody handed me $20,000 and told me to buy a Mercedes that had the best chance of reaching 300,000 miles, I'd spend a fraction of that budget on a clean W204 C300 with the M272 V6 and a manual gearbox if I could find one, even better yet, and keep the rest for maintenance and fuel. I've come to appreciate something simple. The most impressive Benz isn't always the one that feels the most advanced today. At number 3 is the Porsche, and specifically the Turbo. I never planned or intended to be a 911 Turbo historian. I just wanted a fast car that wouldn't self-destruct every time I looked at the tach. That's exactly what led a good friend of mine named Ed, who bought his 2001 to 2005 911 Turbo on his search. The 996 Turbo with a 6-speed manual and the legendary Mezger engine. The funny thing is that when he first started shopping, everyone told him to buy the newest, fastest, most technologically advanced thing he could afford. Instead, he ended up chasing something almost nobody talks about anymore. A twin-turbo sports car with an old-school port fuel injection, no direct injection, a clutch pedal, and an engine designed by people who apparently believed endurance racing was perfectly reasonable way to test reliability. Ed's a mechanic, and he knows how to fix these cars, so he knows what he's looking for, and this is it. The specs sounded almost too good to be true. A 3.6-liter twin-turbo, flat-six making 415 horse, 415 pound-feet of torque, and in standard trim, there was a manual gearbox. You could also get an auto, but we'd skip that. He wanted that with the all-wheel drive system. But even 20 years later, those numbers still command respect. There was also a Turbo S that put out 450 horse and 457 pound-feet of torque, but honestly, even the standard car feels like it could rotate the earth backwards if you launch it hard enough. The first time I got behind the wheel of Ed's 996 Turbo, I realized how easy they are to drive, but not artificially. There's no electronics, no nannies. It's just you, the gearbox, the clutch, and the throttle. But you know what? It doesn't just begin and end there. I learned how fast and fun and indestructible my old air-cooled Porsche 930 was when I took it to the autocross. I once saw an older vet try the same track and leave with a newfound rod knock and some smoke pouring out of the exhaust. That was funny. Meanwhile, the Turbo spent an entire day asking if I planned driving it seriously at some point. It absorbed every launch, every hard shift, and every boost-filled exit without complaint. The clutch felt solid. Even though it was a bit of a cable clutch, they were a little bit wonky, but it worked year after year, mile after mile. By the end of the day, several competitors were discussing overheating issues, brake fade. The Porsche was discussing another lap. My car was flawless. That was when I started understanding why owners became so loyal to their cars. It isn't just the speed. It is the feeling that the engineers built every major component within these to an enormous safety margin. You get the sense that somebody in Stuttgart was handed a requirement for 400 plus horsepower and quietly designed parts capable of surviving considerably more. Of course, no machine is perfect, and I'd be a fool to even tell you that. But let's be honest, for this level of performance, it's solid. Over the years, I learned about the famous coolant pipe issues. Ed told me about that. He fixed some of those problems. Porsche originally secured a certain coolant fitting with adhesive, and after enough heat cycles, they can separate. If you're lucky, you discover it in your garage. If you're unlucky, it's going to happen with a dramatic cloud of steam. Then there's the wastegate. Wastegate wear, eventually high mileage examples, can develop rattles or reduced boost response. Annoying, yes. Catastrophic, not. Window regulators were a problem. Second gear synchros could wear out too if you're driving it too aggressively. And honestly, other than that, the rear wing hydraulics could fail. And like every other manual transmission performance car, the clutch eventually becomes a consumable item. Somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 miles, what really amazes me is how the market finally sees these cars. And they're catching on. Even with the fried egg headlights and the kind of the 996 and affiliation with the 996 Carrera and M96, these are actually great engines and great cars. So back when Ed bought his, they were treated like an awkward kid at the Porsche family reunion. Today, in 26, clean manual examples regularly bring in between $70,000 and $95,000, with low examples pushing $100K. I've even heard of situations with $140,000 transaction price. The newer 0709 997.1 turbos were also a nice upgrade. They gave you the more rounded headlights. The Metzger engine, though, was still in place, and that's a big win. It also avoided direct injection. Those prices climbed higher, with examples reaching $125,000 to $175,000. Cars like this aren't being built anymore. The newer cars are objectively better in many ways. They're faster, more efficient, more comfortable, but loaded with tech that's just going to break, burn out, or just fail. And every time I walk away from Ed's car, or every time he pulls up in front of me, I find myself looking at this thing, amazed. This may be one of the last truly overbuilt performance cars ever made. This is honestly enough durability to make lesser sports cars nervous. Number 4 is actually a Honda. I never thought I would make a list like this. For me, I still remember the first time I paid attention to Hondas, not as cars on the road, but as machines that are quietly outlast expectations. It was one of those evenings in a garage with the door half open and the kind of low light that makes every car look a little more honest than it does under showroom LEDs. A friend of mine rolled up in his Honda Civic Si, and at the time, I didn't think much of it. Just another compact coupe, right? But then he shut the door, let it idle, and said something like, "This thing has 200,000 miles on it." I kind of laughed. I didn't think, yeah, right, okay. Under the hood was that 2.4-liter K24C7 engine and naturally aspirated, port fuel injected, with no turbo tricks, no direct injection, and no carbon fouling drama waiting to happen. Just 201 horsepower and 170 pound-feet of torque, and somehow it felt like it was built with the confidence of something that didn't expect to die young. The fuel economy was nothing honestly exotic either. With about 22 miles per gallon in the city and 31 on the highway, that wasn't really the point, but it was still a bonus. I remember leaning against the fender and saying something like, "It's kind of wild how this feels more modern than it should, but also like it could survive the apocalypse, almost like a cockroach." What really surprised me over time was how the market started to catch up with that feeling. By 2026, they're sitting in the strange middle somewhere, with high mileage examples still going for around 8 to 11,000, good ones, in that 12 to 17, and even nice low examples of $18,000 and more. This is not exactly Ferrari money, but it's not exactly economy commuter money anymore either. And I get it. Because when you drive it long enough, you start to realize it's not just about speed or comfort. It's about how unbothered it is by your existence. And honestly, but the story doesn't stop there. A couple years later, I got my hands on something a little more grown up, a Honda Accord Coupe V6, manual. Under the hood was a 3.5-liter V6 J35 Y2, making 278 horsepower and about 250 pound-feet of torque. Just smooth linear power that showed up exactly where you asked it. And honestly, there was no issues, made no bones about it, and it wound up to the red every single time. Fuel economy wasn't that strong suit though. With 18 miles per gallon in the city and 828 on the highway, it was all right, but nothing really to write home about. And because Honda doesn't build a lot of things this way anymore, the market started to react the same way it did with the Civic Si. By 26, clean manual examples are often sitting between the $12,000 and $18,000 range, with good ones well to the low to mid 20s. Exceptional low mile examples are creeping up to $35,000. That's absolutely unheard of. But if we're talking about Honda's long game, the one that keeps showing up in conversations about reliability, engineering, obsession, and engines that feel like they were built by people who didn't believe in just quitting, you can't avoid talking about the Honda S2000. Even now, years later, that car still feels like something from a different philosophy, entirely different car. The 2.2-liter F22C1 engine made 237 horsepower and 162 pound-feet of torque, which honestly doesn't sound out outrageous until you realize where it makes it. You're not really alive in the car until you're above 6,000 RPM, and then suddenly it's like a whole different car. It wakes up. Fuel economy sat around 18 miles per gallon and 25 on the highway, but the point at 8,000 RPM redline, the razor-sharp manual transmission, and the feeling that Honda engineers collectively decided that compromise was optional. By 26, the S2000 isn't just a used car anymore. It's fully collector territory. Driver quality examples sit around $25K up to $40,000 for nicer versions. This is a car that I love with all of my passion. Looking back at the three, you start to see a pattern. The Civic Si is the quiet overachiever. The V6 Accord with the manual is the underrated heavyweight. And the S2000 is the loud philosopher screaming at 8,000 RPM. They all share something important though. No turbos, no direct injection complexity, and manual transmissions that still feel like something they cared about with your left foot. And all that simplicity is exactly what they're creeping up in value. Not because they're rare or exotic in any way, but because they're rare in the fact that we don't really build them like this anymore. And my fifth forever car, believe it or not, is actually a BMW. The M3 from the E46 generation, which is 2000 to 2006. And in many ways, it represents one of the longest lasting pure M experiences from the last 30 years, before turbos and direct injection took over the philosophy of the brand. It uses a 3.2-liter S54 naturally aspirated inline six, which is very high revving, and avoids both turbos and direct injection, relying instead on port fuel injection and a mechanical precision with a red line that stretches all the way to 8,000 RPM. From the factory, the US version produces 333 horsepower at 7,900 RPM and 262 pound-feet of torque. The car was offered with either a 6-speed manual or the SMG2 automated manual gearbox, which...
I'm good. Thank you. What? I'm good, thank you.
Avoid that one personally. Honestly, most enthusiasts like I and many of you gravitate towards the manual because it preserves the direct, unfiltered connection that defines the actual generation of M cars. And what makes the car so beloved is not just the numbers, but how they come together. The hydraulic steering is famously communicative. The chassis balance is near perfect, and the engine's willingness to scream toward redline creates a sense of occasion that modern turbocharged performance cars only struggle to replicate. It is widely considered one of the last truly analog M cars, built before the shift towards efficiency and forced induction and electronic filtering of the driving feel and that goofy noise through the speakers that's supposed to be the engine sound. The S54 engine has a well-documented rod bearing issue. You've got to take care of that. The rear subframe can develop cracks under hard use due to chassis stress over time. The Vanos variable valve timing system can also degrade, leading to rough idle or reduced top-end performance, reminding owners that this engine, while brilliant, is still a finely tuned mechanical system that demands care. You know, by 2026, the used market reflects its reputation. Rough, high-mileage examples are still, in that $28,000 range, while clean, well-maintained examples typically in that $40,000 and $50,000 range these days. Exceptionally low mileage or collector grade can be over $50,000 for these, with the CSL variants can actually exceed $90,000. The first time the S54 climbs past $6,000, it stops feeling like a transportation device and starts feeling like a decision you made about your own personality. It doesn't politely deliver power, it builds pressure, sound, urgency, until it almost feels like the engine is daring you to stay just a little bit longer. Ownership honestly becomes a strange mix of admiration and mild anxiety as you learn to listen for rod-bearing whispers. You start to treat maintenance records like sacred documents, and still every cold start makes you forget all of that for a moment. At some point you realize the truth. It's not the fastest thing on the road anymore, and it's not the most efficient, but it is one of the last cars that feels like arguing with you. For a lot of people, this is exactly why it never truly gets replaced. But maybe, just maybe, you want to check out some of my other great videos. They're going to help you. If you're looking for something along the same lines, hope that helps each and every one of you. You all have a lovely day, and we'll talk to you on the flip side. See you then. Bye-bye.